Happy Friday, everybody. Sam Shapiro back here with more of your Heat latest on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video and, of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to Miami Heat culture right here Monday through Friday. Jumping into some more mock trades on this Friday's episode, starting off with a deal surrounding Bam Adebayo. I know I've been talking about a lot of hypothetical deals involving Tyler Herro and Nikola Jovic and especially Terry Rozier, and he's definitely going to be a highlight in some of these trades as well. But one that I feel like has kind of been a non-negotiable for Miami has been Bam Adebayo, leaving him on the table for Miami to potentially gain some assets. But this one deal I looked at, could Miami trading Bam to the Spurs be worth the haul? Well, one trade that I did see from fadeawayworld.net has Bam Adebayo going for the Spurs in a deal for Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, a 2028 first and a 2028 first round pick as well. Quite honestly, I don't really see the value in that kind of haul just because Miami, I feel like a broken record talking about the struggles this front court has really been facing. And the only reason they're not struggling any more than they already are is because they have Bam kind of at the helm, at least on that front, and at least in, or depth really in the terms of Miami's roster. So I just think trading him for, maybe a solid draft asset in the future, in addition to go with two guards along with that, doesn't really seem worth Miami's time in the grand scheme of things, especially because they've been investing so much in looking for guards over the course of this past offseason. So at least in terms of this deal, I don't really see it being worth Miami's time, despite having two guards that really are young, show a lot of promise, and could potentially bolster the backcourt, really complementing a player like Tyler Herro really well. I don't really see Kel'el Ware necessarily holding it down single-handedly, at least at this point in his career. So I don't really think that haul personally would be worth it. In terms of the value that Miami's getting for, I don't think those assets are, not really worth it. But in terms of what would be good for Miami's rotation and their team overall, I don't think this trade would really be worth the haul for Bam Adebayo, especially because of just the defensive force he really is, especially how he's been during his entire career so far in the 305. So drop in the comments if you think that deal is just kind of wacko or just, a pretty solid one, at least in terms of what Miami could kind of bolster out of getting for him. Quite honestly, I think it's a bit blasphemous, and I think Miami would be very silly to invest in a trade like that, especially for an asset like Bam Adebayo. But that also kind of begs the question, what about Zion Williamson? Do you think that would definitely, do you think Miami could maybe swing a package for the Pelicans forward, who unfortunately hasn't been able to maintain, staying healthy and consistently being on the court? But I think that this mock trade honestly looks a lot better than this Bam Adebayo trade that I was just kind of talking about. And, this trade would kind of have Miami getting Zion Williamson in a deal for Terry Rozier, Nikola Jovic, and at the time it was initially pronounced early or written early in August, it had Haywood Highsmith in addition to two first-round draft picks being included in that deal. Obviously, Highsmith not a member of the Heat anymore, so quite honestly, you could kind of maybe plug in a guard like Drew Smith in place of Highsmith in this kind of deal, and I feel like the value would kind of match itself. Pairing up a guy like Williamson with Kel'el Ware and Bam Adebayo, I think, would make the front court a lot stronger, and honestly the overall team a lot stronger, assuming Zion could stay healthy and really contribute on both sides of the ball. But at this point in time, that also doesn't look very promising. It's not a 100% guarantee, and Miami also giving up a lot of assets in this trade, obviously wanting to get rid of Terry Rozier, so would definitely be getting some value out of that. But having to include two first-round draft picks to go along with Jovic, I don't think Miami would particularly be interested in, especially investing in a superstar caliber player that's not 100% going to go out there and really compete every single night. At least it's not guaranteed, just based on how the trajectory of his career has kind of been looking right now. But in a perfect world where Zion could maintain his health, be a strong player on a team, and really be kind of the next LeBron and what he was kind of looked like when he was drafted number one overall back with New Orleans initially, then I think it's totally a pretty definite, it's a lot more of a solid proposal than the Bam Adebayo one that I just talked about. Drop in the comments if you think Miami could still potentially have value to haul a guy like Zion Williamson from New Orleans to South Beach, because personally, like I said, in a perfect world, definitely could be worth Miami's time in the grand scheme of things, bringing a guy like him over there and really having him contribute to a front court. But that, again, is if he can contribute in the grand scheme of things. Because if he can't, then ultimately it's not really worth giving up a lot of assets. Miami has really tried to develop, especially in Jovic over this past summer. And who knows, Jovic is kind of playing in overseas right now like he really could. I'm not saying Jovic is a comparable player to Zion Williamson or a healthy Zion Williamson at this time, but he's definitely becoming more of a player that could potentially be a valuable asset to Miami, hopefully this or next season, depending on how his trajectory really his play kind of develops over the next couple of years. So again, very promising trade, I think, in the grand scheme of things, if Zion could stay healthy. But again, also having to give up two first round draft picks, might not necessarily be worth Miami's time, and especially not giving up their future if what they're trading for isn't going to be a guarantee set in stone power forward player that could really contribute at least to Miami's front court that really needs to, kind of be polished up. But like I said, if you're pairing him up with Bam Adebayo and then you have Ware coming off the bench, that is a very, very scary team, having Williamson, Bam Adebayo, and Tyler Herro all starting, and then having a guy like, Kel'el Ware again kind of coming off the bench would just be absolutely lethal in terms of the raw talent that would kind of make up or at least the forefront of the team's rotation in the grand scheme of things. But now moving over to a deal that has really gained a ton of traction over the course of this past summer. The Norman Powell trade is honestly being called one of the biggest steals, if not the steal of the offseason for basically any team really in the NBA. At least Bleacher Report has kind of been saying that now. Ultimately, coming out with the top 5 best offseason moves over the course of this summer, and the Powell trade ranked number 2 on that list. Just to remind you, that trade included Miami getting Norman Powell, the Clippers getting John Collins, and then the Jazz getting Kyle Anderson, Kevin Love, and a 2027 second-round pick from the Clippers. Honestly, getting so much value out of pretty much giving up 2, Kevin Love, a veteran guy, and then Kyle Anderson, not really contributing to the ultimate success, really, of Miami in the grand scheme of things. At least Kyle Anderson, more so I feel like Kevin Love, just because when he initially came to Miami, he wasn't, I feel like he kind of served a little bit of a different role and then kind of transitioned more into a Udonis Haslem glue guy type of player, at least how Haslem was at the end of his career. So, quite honestly, Miami getting a 20-point scorer for that value really ended up, I just think it's funny that we're still talking about how great of a trade this was for Miami, because I'm very excited to see how it's going to translate at least into the regular season, and if Powell is going to live up to the hype and kind of continue to ride on the train he was kind of conducting, at least when he was a Los Angeles Clipper. So again, I just think it's very interesting. The one trade that outbeat that one on Bleacher Report's list was the trade involving the Atlanta Hawks and the New Orleans Pelicans. The Hawks receiving Asa Newell and a 2026 first-round pick, unprotected, most favorable from the Bucks or the Pelicans, and then the Pelicans getting Derek Queen in that trade. Ultimately, the value in that trade, I guess why maybe that trade trumped the Norman Powell trade, at least in Bleacher Report's eyes, ultimately comes from them getting Newell, and in addition to a 2026 unprotected first round pick. You're getting a first round draft, you're getting a first round guy in addition to another pick, in addition to kind of, maybe getting a player that would have been selected a couple spots up from that. So I'm not saying that, I'm not really saying that the Pelicans didn't get anything out of it, but the Hawks definitely getting what some would maybe call on paper double the value out of that trade. So maybe that was why they kind of said, ultimately the Hawks kind of having the steal of the, over the course of the last couple of months in terms of a, transaction to kind of deepen their roster and give them more flexibility in the future. But I just think that, in the grand scheme of things, what could translate to immediate success right now, Norman Powell, that trade kind of out-trumps this trade a little bit. So drop in the comments which trade you think kind of has more value, this trade involving the Atlanta Hawks and the Pelicans, or Miami's, honestly, steal of the offseason, really, for Norman Powell, and hopefully adding another 20-point clip to their arsenal going into the tip-off of this regular season. But it also kind of moving over to another subject that I feel like has been touched on over the course of this past, especially over the last couple of months, concluding the end of the 2024-25 regular season, is Kel'el Ware. What exactly is going to happen in terms of how the next 1 or 2 seasons progress if Kel'el Ware doesn't really live up to the hype? I mean, it's been kind of on record at this point that Miami is expecting Ware to kind of continue to develop to the point where he's hopefully an all-star either this or next season. But what exactly happens if that, Kel'el Ware doesn't really develop into that kind of player and kind of just falls into the middle of the pack in terms of where the rotation stands, especially that could be very concerning, seeing how the front court has really kind of developed, especially over this season, and really that showing most of the kinks in the armor that Miami needs to kind of polish up on. So it begs the question, if Ware doesn't develop over the course of this season, does Miami decide, do you think Miami should, drop in the comments, because personally, I'll weigh my point, but I'm curious to see what you guys think in terms of, should Miami continue to see his development through progressing in Miami over multiple seasons, or should they just kind of, put the nail in the coffin in it right now and just try to see what assets they could pull for him, assuming he does have a ton of potential? I know he was kind of almost at the forefront of every hypothetical trade involving Kevin Durant, and because of the potential surrounding Ware, Miami was just kind of like, we are not touching any deals involving Kel'el Ware in exchange for Kevin Durant, because, Durant also a little bit older, but also the talent he would bring really to any roster he would go to kind of almost matches the potential that Kel'el Ware maybe has. Miami disagreeing with that ultimately. That's why I feel like Miami not really deciding to make a move. And I can't really blame them at this point, because Ware definitely has a very high ceiling for the type of player he could be. But I think that if, this season ends up kind of mirroring what we saw last year, it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to wait another year and see how he develops. I mean, obviously, we've kind of seen the Pela Larson and Nikola Jovic experiment kind of translating to how their play has looked overseas this summer. And again, that's not a guarantee they're going to come in this regular season and bust the barn doors open and be contributing guys in the rotation. But we've seen players like Miami come through this and ultimately become, in some regards, postseason stars. Caleb Martin was definitely one guy that I think a lot of people didn't necessarily think was going to be, a hero, especially in, multiple instances against the Boston Celtics. Then you have Duncan Robinson, who pretty much came out of nowhere, starting from, Williams, a Division III program, and then ultimately becoming arguably one of the best snipe shooters or three-point scorers on Miami's team over the last at least 10 years. And, well, really over the last 15 years. You kind of think him, Ray Allen, and Tyler Herro being kind of the best outside scorers this franchise has seen at least since 2010. And you're also forgetting about Mike Miller as well, and Shane Battier a little bit in that conversation. But, I mean, those guys, and even Kendrick Nunn, also basically coming out of nowhere and developing into a focal guard for this team. Gabe Vincent's another guy. These are all guys that Miami spent multiple seasons really banking on, kind of allowing them to get more comfortable in the rotation, and then it really paying off because it created so much extra depth for Miami that they didn't even really know that they had, and other teams really didn't know that they had. Max Strus, another great example that I also left out. So I think that if Miami doesn't bite the bullet and decide to trade Ware because he doesn't necessarily live up to the all-star type of hype that people are hoping that he's going to, really bring to the floor each and every night over the course of this next season, there's no reason why Miami should, ultimately just go, all right, we're just going to tear it down and see what kind of haul we could get for Ware. Unless, maybe it's involving some sort of superstar type of player like a Giannis Antetokounmpo. Maybe in that regard, I would consider, moving on from Ware. But unless you're getting a player like that, like a top 10 or a top 5 player, I think it's worth seeing the development of him through, because they have a proven track record of developing players that nobody really knew about before and making them key rotational guys that make a difference, especially in big games. So drop in the comments if what you think Miami should do if Kel'el Ware doesn't necessarily live up to the hype in this next season and ultimately take some sort of form, at least projecting all, remnants of an NBA All-Star. That's going to do it for today's episode of Your Heat Latest here on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video and, of course, subscribe for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here Monday through Friday. Hope everybody has a great weekend. I'm Sam Shapiro. Take care.